as we kind of transition this into the topic here, I do want to share personally, because Matt shared his story. So in 2000, I graduated BSME from Clemson in 92, and I worked in engineering for all the big boys, Fluor, Jacobs, all this stuff. In 2006, I opened my own engineering firm. That was easy, y'all. I had one employee, me. I just didn't pay myself. And then I had to subcontract my brother to do work for me, and he actually expected to get paid, believe it or not. But I could afford that. Well, then I wanted to open this boating business, and I put a business plan together, and I went to a local bank. 8 rejections later, I finally got funded. That is old school, y'all. I was trying to just get funding on my good name and on my credit. I had to sign over property as collateral. And then you start a business. That's the old-fashioned way. Today, I'm going to try to help you with some, with some of these folks' experience and some of the things they've seen. We have a ton of experience sitting up here. So we're going to ask our folks to introduce themselves and then just quickly say how they funded their very first venture. And we'll finish with Kiki because she's got a kind of a different perspective on this. So John, Chris, y'all talked a lot in that first session, but do share your very first funding. Introduce yourself and how you funded that.
So John Collins, I'll talk about maybe the last, if you don't mind, because I didn't touch on that. So after an operating career and then a little bit of CEO at on location, we went out with a partner to raise $450 million from institutional investors through a special purpose acquisition company. And frankly, it was the moment where, Chris asked before, like those moments. I mean, that was the moment where I figured out that I wasted my entire career. Because who thought it would be so easy to raise $450 million for something we didn't even have an idea what it was. But the reality was, it was actually what I did for 30 years before that gave me the credibility and ultimately gave the investors confidence that we would be able to find a deal that was worthy of their investment and ultimately take that company public.
And very successfully. Well done. I'm Chris Bevilacqua. I spent the first part of my career working for great companies like NBC Sports, Major League Baseball, Nike, and then decided I want to go off and be an entrepreneur. And I founded, or was the founder of College Sports Television in 2001. It was actually right post-bubble. Remember you guys are, I guess, too young to remember the internet bubble bursting. So it wasn't a great time to be raising money when we were trying to start off an enterprise like a 24-hour cable network, because plus or minus, the plan was you needed about $100 to $150 million in those days to do that. So the original funding, and I spent about a year on my own, kind of like you just said, John, bootstrapping it, like paying my own way to fly around the country and try to get the support necessary, and got a bunch of rights agreements in place with the big conferences that would say we will make available our programming rights if you go get the money. And at that point, we had enough in place, and then we went out, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute. I guess I would describe that as kind of early stage funding, almost like seed funding, but we needed about $10 million. So we had kind of a compilation of Allen and Company, which is an investment bank business that does a lot of work in sports, kind of seeded that first couple of million. And then on top of that, we were able to get what I would describe more as like high net worth individuals, not really institutional money. And that allowed us to get about $10 million in place to start hiring people, which eventually became, I think we had 300 employees by the time it was done. And we ended up raising 3 other rounds of financing, about $120 million total of funding. But it started with that first deal with Allen and Company and some Ray Chambers. You know Ray Chambers? Yeah, Ray Chambers, ex-music executive. Anyway, so that's how we got started.
Kiki, you've coming at this from a different perspective. I know most people probably recognize the brand, your parent brand, but tell them a little bit about Drive particularly.
Sure. So just, I know I'm new up on stage, so I'll do a quick intro of my background, but Kiki Mills Johnston, I've spent most of my career working with early stage entrepreneurs. I've realized over time it's kind of become my life's mission to help startups win. I think every great founder, you guys know, every great founder remembers that first person that helped them. And you talk to Jason Robbins of DraftKings, he remembers being at a startup event and he had this idea of daily fantasy sports, and there was a lawyer, and it was a very new area, and there's a lawyer that he met at an event and just helped him pro bono, just understanding how this was going to work. And every great founder has a story like that of someone or many people that have helped them along the way. So I've spent most of my career building organizations in the form of industry associations, accelerator programs, funding networks to really work with early stage entrepreneurs across all different industries. Flash forward to now, I'm a partner at Drive by DraftKings, and we're an independent from DraftKings. We're an early stage venture firm focused in sports, tech, and entertainment. Back to Jason, he, because of that why for him, he's like, is there a way that we as DraftKings could help to really support the next generation of sports, tech, and entertainment companies, just like DraftKings was. So I was part of the founding team to get that off the ground. Initially, we started as an operating company, and we were going to build a venture studio with some funding network and help athletes think about their next career after sports. And then we decided we morphed it into a venture capital fund, a traditional GPLP model. We raised $60 million. Have invested in 25 companies over the course of the last several years.
Wow. So we're talking some big bucks up here. But as a panel, we thought we needed to pause for a minute and actually just talk a minute about some different funding options. We've already heard the word seed capital. There's venture capital, private equity. A lot of people know the term. But as a panel, if y'all could just maybe, Chris, I know for your first 24-hour sports network, you spoke briefly about that, but talk about which method y'all used, and then, then John, you can speak for just a minute, and then of course, Kiki, I'd like you to finish with how does Drive fund these different things? So yeah,
Do we want to put that slide up? Yeah, cool.
Got one coming. So, but
Fancy.
Chris, if you want to kind of kick it off with just, you talked a little bit before, but go ahead and add a little bit more about some different, whether it's seed capital, venture capital, private equity.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about the newer venture I had. This goes all the way back to 2018, and that's when I founded a sports data and technology company, kind of operating in the sports gaming space. It was a company called SimpleBet, and we built technology that allowed for deep in-game fan engagement and ultimately sports betting, so that you could essentially engage with a live event in real time and make bets or propositions on what was going on during the game. And in order to do that, when we set out to raise capital, this was in 2018, it was right after PASPA got repealed. That was the law that prohibited gambling in the United States, got repealed in 2018. We knew we were going to have to go fast, and our business plan called for somewhere between $75 and $100 million. And of course, we didn't want to take all that in up front, so that we were going to do it in stages, just like I described we did with the college sports television. And my initial, the cost of capital for a founder early on is typically expensive, because people like Kiki negotiate really hard to get good percentage ownership. So we decided that we were going to do early stage, what I describe as seed capital. And the best place for us at that time was to go and get it from essentially my network of people that I've known over my career, and go back to their family offices or high net worth individuals who, ultimately, when they assess these kind of opportunities, you're really assessing the founders and management. Do you trust that person? Has that person, like John said a minute ago, have they delivered for other investments over the course of time? Which in our case, the answer was yes. We were able to tap in what I would describe more as this in the seed capital stage of non-institutional, so family offices, and these are all professional investors that have their own private equity or venture firms, but also invest separately through their family offices. So that's really where we got our first. It was almost $15-20 million that we got off, and we ended up raising almost 100 over 3 rounds of financing.
Wow, John, done a lot of things over your career. We talked last night. You've been on some panels today. Maybe talk about some other funding options that might be available to entrepreneurs?
So look, Kiki's a lot more sophisticated in this area, and she actually did the homework for the two jocks in the room with the slide. So, look, I would say with Chris, what I learned is, once you have that operating capabilities, you get a lot of credibility, whether you're in the finance world or not. And when you get into the finance world, almost anybody will sort of pledge money with the idea that they'll get a first look at your deal. And if that deal is good and they like the management team, then raising the money is pretty easy. But I think what Kiki does is a lot more, is a lot harder and a lot more sophisticated, because she's taking early bets, right, on companies that could be great companies, like the one that Chris sold to DraftKings, or maybe they never get out of the box. Right?
And there's a lot of those. I'm just curious, who is thinking about starting a business? Raise your hand. There we go. 1, 2. All right, cool. Okay, we got some. I think, my world and most of my experience has kind of been on that left-hand side of that. We put that slide together just to kind of understand, for everyone to understand kind of the different stages and when you're thinking about a business. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and I mean, you say your story, John, is old school, and I don't think it's old school. I think it's just anyone that's starting a business, everyone thinks like, oh, venture capital, it's sexy. It's really cool. I need to get it. And it works for some businesses and it doesn't work for others. And if you don't have to take venture capital, don't take it. So, and this slide is really just to represent that, particularly in early stages, many ways to raise money early on. And there's a period or point when you're at growth that you might need to use a different mechanism to do that. And to the point of, we look at a lot of businesses and there's great companies out there, but they're just not be venture backable. And that is not a bad thing. It's just that our job is, our bosses are the LPs that invest in our fund, and they expect and want and hope for a specific return. And so we need to find the profile of a business that will do that. And to the point, we are betting, and because we look at 800 deals a year and we invest in 1% of those. And some of it, you're really relying on the team and and the TAM and how differentiated the product is. And it can be hard. Now, when you get to a second business and a third business and you have a serial entrepreneur, you are going on track record and it makes it a little bit easier, but it's timing and it's so many different things. So, but I think, and I really encourage, if there's any one message for anyone looking to form a business, understand all the different ways to do it, because there's many different pathways you can go down.
So we're going to kind of transition a little bit here. I think we got another slide coming up that Chris was going to speak to. This something that came up in our pre-planning. There were a couple of key dates that caught me off guard. I thought I knew a little bit about sports and things like that, but there were a couple of key dates. There we go. Yeah, so Chris, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, because you caught me off guard with this. I didn't realize how significant some of these are.
Yeah, I get what I put up there. This is just looking at the continuum over the last 25 years and how institutional capital, just capital raising in general, has changed over time. And you can point to a lot of events along the way. Starting, I mentioned earlier, the dot-com bubble. And then, just looking at it from the business that I've worked in over my career in sports and entertainment, technology, there's been things along the way that have changed, and technology has been kind of in the middle, whether that was the iPhone that was getting created, or there were the growth of pay television over time, and eventually those businesses grow up and they mature, and then stuff happens, and then all of a sudden you're off on a different path. And so, if I look at, and part of, I think, John, the way we got to the discussion around here of this slide was sports itself, right? Over that continuum, starting in 2000 all the way to where we are now, has now really become its own asset class. And that's really more recently. And what I mean by asset class, and Kiki is the professional investor up here, but there's lots of now institutional capital that is being raised specifically to deploy into sports and sports ownership and adjacent businesses around it, because it's turned into be a stable and predictable and a high growth business. So if you looked at, the IRRs over time and the growth of sports as an asset over that 25-year period, it outstrips, the general markets, right? It outstrips. If you put $1 into, the Dow Jones or $1 into some index fund, you'd have nice returns over time, but sports has actually exceeded that. And now you have a lot of professional institutional money now being raised, and it's turned sports into its own asset class. And that's why you see, all these, like I saw today, your old friend Gary Bettman put out, if you want to buy a franchise, or an expansion franchise or the NHL, it's $2 billion fee just to get in. That's before you spend another $1 billion on an arena and what have you. So sports is, because of its predictability and because the growth around, especially around media and the increasing value of live events in this culture of, trying to attract engagement, live events and sports entertainment are right at the top of that sphere. And that's why I think you've seen all this turn into an asset class.
I think the other thing, before I turn it over to Kiki on it, because she may rip it apart, but it's that sort of idea that with this investment, you can, like George Steinbrenner had the great line about, hey, I was really successful when I was building ships in Cleveland, but nobody knew who I was until I owned the New York Yankees. And there is still that sort of feeling around sports that not only is it sort of, hey, I'm successful and now I'm going to let people know that I'm successful, but also the sort of opportunities that can come in, throughout the community, right? Like, so all these arenas and all these stadiums are moving not just to be brand new arenas and stadiums with great fan experiences, but they're going into real estate, right? Entertainment complexes, which are 365 days a year, as opposed to the 81 games for baseball or the 8 games for football. And so it's a much different sort of opportunity. And, Warren Buffett made a lot of money investing in Coca-Cola, right? But I think a lot of people are chasing this sort of sports asset class because it's where, all the fish are, really.
No, it's so true. And you think about it, these rising valuations, $2 billion. And then, you pay that, you're adding another $1 billion on. Well, how do you start to make that money back, right? How do you start to monetize your fans better? It's everything that Michael Drake was talking about, because that's added pressure to figure out those ways to do it. And you would know this better than me, but even like NFL, like some of the teams, they don't even know their data. They don't even know who their fans are on some levels. And so there's so many different technologies and solutions coming out so that teams and leagues can actually, on the team side, can truly understand who their fans are and market to them, not just for the games during the season, but market to them 24/7, 365. Oh, and then how do we create a bigger experience around that? So it's not just the game. We're going to dinner. We're going to do different things. Oh, and now we have younger generations. They're not even watching a full game anymore. The Gen Z, Gen Alphas watch highlights. Okay, so how are we going to now change our product to fit that? So there's just so many other, things that you have to think about now as an owner and how you really keep that fan engagement. It'll always be there. You have to shape shift it to the generation and where they are and meet them where they are.
John, this isn't necessarily on our list, but we talked last night briefly about the work you're doing with the NHL up in New York, and I mentioned that maybe people around Clemson might be familiar with the Braves setup, but maybe explain just a minute what you're doing, and then to me that is so massive. How do you fund something that large? But share with them the vision and kind of what's going on up there.
So I think, just expanding on Kiki's point, like no one buys a sports franchise just for, what you do on game day anymore, right? It's content is king. It's the intellectual property. And then really, if you own the IP, it's how you monetize it. The cash machine for a lot of the designers and the manufacturers who are addicted to sort of new seasons, and they just keep rolling. And the way he was going to begin to build his brand was to create sort of an incredible shopping village experience, not just an outlet, right? So you walk in there, I think I mentioned before, like it's, you know, the people who work there think they're working at Disney, at one of the Disney parks. They don't think that they're in a shopping mall. So that was incredible. And then the other piece of it is the, you know, $450 million renovation of Belmont Park Raceway, the racetrack, which, you know, is one of the big revenue generators for New York State. But had really, you know, nobody thinks of horse racing as being cutting edge at this point, but it's going to be the greatest horse racing venue, both for the athletes as well as the horses in the world. And it's going to host one of the most important races, you know, in that world, Belmont Stakes. They're also going to get the Breeders' Cup. And then in addition, you have an incredible facility, which frankly, during the summers can host music festivals, food and wine festivals. And so you begin to think about, you know, a 365-day programming opportunity with all this real estate that really are kind of separate entities and have their own P&Ls. But the opportunity is really to put them together in that sort of magical Venn diagram, which is, you know, sports, entertainment, fashion, hospitality.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to even fathom bringing a team that large together. And I'm sure Kiki, some folks in the office, these students are probably overwhelmed a little bit. But if we've got some folks in the audience and they've got this idea, you know, you've seen a lot of young entrepreneurs. I kind of talk them through maybe some next steps and how they could transition to maybe one day bringing an idea and pitching it to Drive.
Yeah, I could talk all day on this, but I'll try and keep it to like 2 minutes. But I think you heard it, and I loved what some of the alum were talking about and the advice they were giving out. I mean, first, you know, you have an idea, and I forget, I think it was Rob who said it, like, just be passionate about an idea. And, you know, you know, it's this classic kind of cliche line, but, you know, have a problem, you know, in search of a solution, not a solution in search of a problem. And, you know, you want that problem could be deep, that problem could be wide, but there's really a problem to be solved. And then you start to build a business around it. I think the second most important thing is you're starting to surround yourself with smart people, probably smarter than you, and people that could be your mentors, advisors, someone that's done it before. You know, I'm sure I can imagine how many times you guys have gotten an email saying, hey, I've got this idea, would you talk to me about it, type of thing, because that's how all great founders start. They find people who've done something in and around it, and they ask for 30 minutes, and that's it, you know, and hey, can I talk to one other person? So really starting to mine and find the people that you can build around. And then, you know, when you find resources like what Dr. Hannon's running here and the universities, it's so critical because, you know, I guess, you know, I would call myself an ecosystem builder in most of my career, where you're bringing together all the assets that help a founder. It's people, it's mentors, it's money, it's foundational events, it's things that help you find those things. And when you can do that and you can leverage things like this, you really start to get the beginnings of a business. You know, from there, you know, we don't slide up, but you know, you're figuring out how to raise some early money from that. Maybe it's coming from family and friends. You might be self-funding it. You might be doing an accelerator program. Take advantage of all the resources that you can, where you don't have to pay for them. And most of the great founders will go through some incredible accelerators, whether it's Mass Challenge, A16Z, YC. There's great ones out there that you can go to. And, you know, and then as you start to prove out your product market fit, maybe it's venture money, maybe it's not. But all along the way, you're taking feedback. You're actually, you know, you love hearing the great things about what you're doing, but you actually, if you're a good founder, you want to hear what people don't like and what they don't understand, because that's where the gold is. And I've seen the best founders, they're like Teflon. They're like, yeah, no, I know you love it, but like, what don't you like? Tell me what's wrong. Like, how can I fix something? And that, if I can impart that piece of knowledge on a founder, I think it's one of the most critical things. And I'm repeating other people, just be curious, ask questions, you know, really listen. And from there you build your product. And if you're building something that people really want and they know they're going to pay for it, then, you know, and then you're able to build upon that, you know, you probably got a good company. And there's a lot of things, it's timing, it's all the things that you guys have talked about. So it's not guaranteed, you know, success. But I think the fundamental building blocks are, you know, are pretty simple in many ways. And then you have to have the people around you to help navigate all those times of getting through things. You guys have done this, so, you know, please add to that.
Yeah, I'd add everything you said is spot on. The other thing I would and it's just 'cause I had the personal experience and gone through it a few times, is to any new entrepreneur, like, and this might sound cliche or it might actually sound wrong, but failure is a necessary ingredient to success. You will fail along the way, but it's how quickly you respond to that failure, as long as it's not fatal. And I promise you that, that's where you learn, and that's how I used to call it, be a fast failure, and then move on to the next one. And so that's a key ingredient to be an entrepreneur. And if you can use that together with, never, like I mentioned earlier, never giving up, and having conviction in your ideas, not trying to have a solution in search of a problem. Like, that's all stuff that you pressure test on your way before you get the real conviction. But that's the package.
Yeah. And, I would add to that, just like, time is death, in the sense that, like, you never have enough time. And I didn't, getting into, as we launched Drive and starting to meet with companies, I actually didn't understand how much a founder valued me saying no quickly and just moving on, because the follow-ups, all that stuff, it's bullshit. It's time wasted. And so it's hard sometimes. It felt so awkward for me initially. I'm like, no, but they're just like, thank you. Some aren't. Some are like, screw you, but probably more screw you than thank you. But anyways, but still, it's really important. Time is everything.
We're going to start transitioning into Q&A, but I'm going to kind of throw out one there that has got to be on somebody's mind out here. So while we're getting microphones ready, would any of y'all ever consider taking an idea to Shark Tank? How does that work? I just saw something. That show's been on like 8 or 9 years now, and it's still successful. Would anybody in all your years, if you look back, if there was such a thing as Shark Tank, would you have ever considered going on there?
Well, Chris is the movie star, so he'd probably do it. I think that show's fascinating, because they're spending their own money, right? I don't know what the follow-ups are, right? And whether or not the moment where they do a deal, on camera, whether that actually works out as good as everybody hopes it'll work out. But it's been running now for how many years? 15 years. Phenomenal. Made some big guys.
Would you do it?
Reputations for different guys.
Would you have done it?
Listen, I would love to see the data. There's probably been, what,
Yeah.
500 founders that have gone through there and gotten money. Like, how many of them made it?
Yeah. Yeah. Or how many of them actually get the money?
How many actually get the money? And I guess it comes down to, when you go through that, is it worth, because you're giving up equity,
Yeah.
and, those guys are trying to drive hard bargains, but is there value on the other side? Does a deal get done? And is all the other visibility worth it? Like, you've got to put a price on that. So I don't know if I would have done it.
Speed to market, you addressed. It's critically important. So
Statistics show that 9 out of 10 startup businesses fail. The two biggest reasons for that are bad business plan and lack of finance. Are there any advice that you could give to entrepreneurs in your history that might help them in that endeavor?
Well, the lack of funding that's like, and Kiki, the capital has real leverage in those early discussions. So I think it's a matter of those 9 out of 10 that fail, right? Was it the idea or the plan or what was led up to that? Was it a solution searching for a problem? So I'm sure there's a lot of that built into that 90%, but you do need capital, and getting capital and the friends and family route, if you can do it in the early stage, like I was mentioning earlier, going back to like family offices and high net, like that's probably the most important step, is marrying up, the actual business and the plan together with the right access to capital. But it has to be coordinated in a way that, it kind of syncs up. And you're right, 9 out of every 10 businesses fail. And that's a fact of reality. It's reality.
I think I've sort of found that your point about when capital comes in, they have a point of view. That was for a while one of the obstacles of our potential success was, it's their money. They're sort of saying, it's my company now, and this is the way I want to run it. There is oftentimes, certainly not with Kiki, but there is an arrogance that comes with that money. We've seen this 1,000 times. This is the way we do it. This is what we require. Which is why it's really important for the management team to have a clear vision of what they want to do and then be allowed to execute. Because usually it is, again, from an operator point of view, usually it's the management team that sort of gets you there. I have my experience, which is not that vast on this, is the capital will take you off into other directions. And you got to really fight that battle.
And I think on that note, and this is probably more for the earliest of stage, there's good capital and there's bad capital. And, I would define good capital as investors, there's individuals, others, they're aligned with you, they're aligned with your business, they are aligned with your vision, they can help you strategically. And there's bad capital, there's kind of this thing called dumb capital, dumb capital on the cap table, dumb money on the cap table. I don't like to use that, but there's money that you can find from individuals and others that, might be doing it for a different reason. And I think the struggle for a founder in trying to build a business when capital is hard is, of course I'd like to find the best money, the most aligned money out there, but sometimes I can't, and I have to take A, B, or C. And so it is a big thing that founders wrestle with. Fundraising is just, it's the hardest and the worst. And most founders, when they're trying to raise money, they're like, it can take 6 to 12 months to raise. And it takes you away from your business. And one of the most important things, if we're doing, we're invested in something and there's a follow-on round and the business is really chugging, you're just trying to get that money raised for them as fast as possible because they can get back to business. Because we all see businesses that just start to fail because they spent too much time trying to raise. And so I think the quality of that money matters. And it's nice for me to sit up here on a perch and say that. I understand that. But, I think as founders think about where to go and where to find the money, and sometimes, maybe that money's not out there because maybe the business plan isn't up to snuff or the timing is not right. But, it does really go hand in hand.
In relation to an early growth company and in relation to the financing question, in your experience, Kiki, maybe on not the lending side, but that side, and you guys on the asking for the money side, if you could place which factor, whether it's the market the product's in, the problem that they're solving, the management team, the trust in that, is there a leading factor in your experience that has the most success to bring that to the table, that presentation?
There has, for me, the leader. It's the people, 100%.
I mean, it's how great is the team? How big is the market? How differentiated is the product? The classic questions. Regardless of all that, you can do a big investment memo. You can do all these things. You can think about all the scenarios. But every time it comes back to the team, every single time. And, you hear it, you kind of think it's cliche-ish. And then when you see it in action, and we've seen it in action with successes and failures, it's the team, it really is. And great venture capitalists and other lenders of money will say, when you have an A team, you do your best to get out of the way, because just let them go do what they do best. And you got to stay around and have a relationship there, but you really want to stay out of the way of incredible founders, even though it might be mantic of how they might be doing it or not. Let them go do what they do best.
Okay, so I know that finding product market fit is essential to a startup success. And I know that it can be incredibly challenging and costly to find it. So do you think that there's a best path to take or strategy to use to find it? And I know that Chris kind of touched on failures being essential to success, but is there a certain amount of failures that you should have as a stopping point in dropping the idea?
I did when I die. I was going to die on the hill. No, it's a good question. How much is too much failure? And, I always have the words of a good friend of mine, Howard Schultz. Everybody know Howard Schultz? Howard's the founder, CEO of Starbucks. He always say, failure is not an option. But and that goes back to what I was saying in the earlier session about having like real conviction. You've done your work, product market fit analysis, whatever the product, like, you know it's going to work. You believe in all your heart it's going to work. And now it's just a matter of doing it. And then having that conviction, and, you're going to fail, like have these mini failures along the way, but you'll know if any one of those is catastrophic or not. But if it's not, you keep going.
On your timeline slide, I think it's a little hard to predict even 5 years. Say 2027. Any guesses as to what could be the next milestone or marker?
I think, I mean, you're more focused on this than anybody, but I mean, because we are here. I mean, it's probably the college sports media landscape, right?
That's a great, that's only 2 years. Like, things move very slowly in college. We were talking about that earlier, but there is a lot of stuff happening at the kind of legislative level that is going to change the course of this entire industry over the next 100 years. And it very well could happen in the next couple of years. But I would say, to go back to the 27, it's going to, in some way, shape, or form, be related to AI. AI is going to unlock enormous innovation over the next 10 years. So there's something in 2027 that I think will happen on that front. That's my prediction.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. So what he said, and I mean, there's so many different areas that it will impact. What I find so interesting is just in the human performance space. And we heard a lot of people talk about wearables and different things, and this democratization of healthcare and the ability to have agency over oneself through your biometrics, through blood, and you understanding your body and able to advocate for your body and your health. Like, I am most excited to see how that evolves for athletes and things where, Whoop really started in the military and in professional athletes, and now it's going, downstream, and it usually always starts with elite markets. But for this to then go into kind of the mainstream America, that I think is, it's not in the next 2 years, but, and I think it's going to be messy along the way, but I think I'm so excited to see how that goes. And I'm hopeful that it's actually going to have the benefit of democratizing so much for people.
All right. John, Chris, thank you for working with me and for pulling this panel together. Kiki's tipped the hand on our last panel, which will be not only analytics, but also the sports tech that goes with this. That's wearables and all that stuff. So good setup. But before that, we've got to talk about product ideation, development, branding. Jim Spears is going to head this group up. I was on this panel last year. If there's entrepreneurs in the audience, you need to be paying attention.